Here, what is up, guys? Coach Cole back in the building, back today with another deck profile. And yes, today we do have the cockroach deck profile. Enel, the leader, if y'all already see it on the screen, Slim Shady himself, the Slim God himself. We are going to be talking about Enel today. Now, Enel, if y'all don't know, y'all should know, is literally probably the most hated deck in the format, only because of the fact that it does not die. If you don't know what Enel does, on your opponent's turn, once per turn, when the number of life cards on your side of the field, so when you get to 0, reaches 0, you can literally add 1 life card to the top of your deck to your life and then discard a card. So hear that correctly. You basically get to bring a card from the top of your life to your life, or the top of your deck to your life, and then you discard a card. So the card that you just got from life, in order to get to 0, you can discard for free. And if you have no cards in hand, it's unconditional because of the fact that you have to put the top card of your life first and then discard. So if you have no cards in hand, you can still trigger a null effect. It's so annoying. It's so ridiculous. It's the only reason why Enel is a 4-life leader, the only 4-life mono leader in the game right now. Just a ridiculous leader overall. So today I'm going to be demonstrating my deck profile, and honestly, I'll be completely honest with you guys. I started playing this deck in OP7. I won with it a couple of times. Really liked it, and I think since OP7 and its new tools, it is a cool deck, but it is very gimmicky. I don't enjoy playing it, but I do enjoy seeing it do well, right? So we're gonna go over my Enel deck profile, right? So that is the leader, and now let's get into the starters of the deck, right? So I play 4 Flampe, and the reason why you want to play 4 Flampe in this deck is because it's super important to be able to 1-see your 2Ks. But the way that Enel likes to play is basically, I want all the cards in my hand as soon as possible. So if you're at 4 life, you want to basically get Enel down to 1 life as soon as possible, you being the pilot of the deck, right? And Flampe allows you to do that. So at 1 Dawn turn, even if you go first or second, you're going to play Flampe for 1. And what Flampe does is, on play, you get to add a top card from your life to your hand, and then you get to draw a card. So for playing Flampe, you essentially get a generic +1 because you draw from life and you draw from your deck. And Flampe is really good. At worst, it is a 2K counter, and you do play a decent amount of counter in this deck in order to be able to handle hits from other aggro decks. So Flampe is really good, right? Next, we play probably the best trigger in the game. It is Capone Beji. This is the Altar version, but if you guys don't know what Beji does, you play, because of its trigger, up to 1 of your opponent's leaders or characters cannot attack for the turn if you trigger this thing off life. This literally wins games automatically because your opponent will calculate for life, calculate for game, and then you hit a Beji trigger and then you just win on the crackback, right? Beji is super important in this deck because of the fact that basically the way the Enel leader works is, if you're at 1 life, your opponent has to hit you 3 times. 1 for the 1 life in your life, and then again for the life that you gain back off of Enel, and then again to hit you at 0 in order to game you, right? So Beji at any point in the game is really good, but it's especially good at 1 life. Can just flat out win you games sometimes. Next in the deck, we play 4 Frankie. And the reason why we play 4 Frankie is because, again, it's just a better Satori. In OP7, you used to play Satori, which was a 5-cost 5K. Frankie is the same thing, but you do not have to minus a card from your hand in order to play it. So his effect is draw 1 card. That's his trigger effect. And then if you have 1 or less cards, which Enel likes to get to at a lot, you get to play this card for free. So you draw a card, so you get an essential +1, and then get a body on board, which is really good. Way better than Satori was, because Satori, again, made you drop a card in hand that you really don't want to do in Enel. So Frankie is just a better Satori, right? The next card, again, as y'all noticed, we are playing a whole bunch of triggers. We are playing 4 Shirahoshi, and I play the winner because I have a playset. But essentially what Shirahoshi does is play this card on trigger, and its on-play effect is draw 3 cards and trash 2 cards. So in this deck, you do play a lot of counter, but you also play a lot of high-end, top-end, which are brick cards. So if you see your top-end cards at the start of the game, sometimes you can just flat out lose because you have no counter power. So what Shirahoshi allows you to do is just cycle through your hand, which is super important. The reason why Sabo in black is so important is because it lets you cycle dead cards in hand. Shirahoshi does that in yellow, but it's just like a more cracked version of it. And on top of the fact that you can put this back into life with some of your own effects like Katakuri, Shirahoshi is just so good in this deck. And if you see it at 1 life, again, you can go Shirahoshi effect first and then Enel effect. So you have another card to discard, or you can do it in any particular order. But Shirahoshi, so good in this deck. Next, your only real Dawn play up at 5 Dawn or lower is going to be Gadatsu. So Gadatsu's effect, if you guys don't know, is on play, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with equal to or less life cards than they have, right? So typically if you're playing against like a red purple law or a Bonnie or basically any deck that plays 4 costs or lower, what you typically want to do on turn 1 if you see a Gadatsu is you're going to pass, so you're going to play a Flampe maybe. On second turn, you do have a 3 Dawn swing and you can go 8 into lead. Typically, Enel players don't like doing that, and they like setting up their Gadatsus because whatever they play on turn 4, you get to kill for free with Gadatsu, and then you get to swing for 5 and basically get value with a Gadatsu and an Enel on board, sitting for your 7 Dawn turn, right? Typically, the curve that Enel likes to go to is going first, and I truly believe that going first is the most optimal way to play Enel because of the fact that your curve is way better on your 1 Dawn odd curve, right? But I also think that you can play this deck to optimize for going second because now we have Porcus D Ace, which is the 10 cost that we'll talk about in a little bit, and Gadatsu and Ace and all that. Like this deck just has so many plays, so many lines that it's ridiculous, right? But Gadatsu is a staple at 4 of. Next, we're going to be playing more triggers. Surprise, surprise, right? But we play 4 Onami. And Onami by itself isn't a great card in this deck. It's better in Katakuri and Yamato, but it is super helpful because it's a removal card as a trigger, right? So if you don't know what Onami does, as a trigger, you KO a opponent's character with a 5 cost or less, which is pretty targeted to like 90% of this meta, right? And on play, if you for whatever reason have a top end and you need to kind of just get some damage off and you want to get a banish on, right? On play, you can choose one of your leaders or characters, so it is not just restricted to leader. And you could give it banish, right? So let's say, for example, you have a Yamato or a 10 cost ace on the board and it's been sitting there for a little bit and you want to chip away at some damage. You can play Onami for 2 and then give it banish. They either have to take it or they have to give you a lot of counter. And then you can even put this back in life with like something like Katakuri, which is so good. Like this deck is really good. And it's just another form of removal that you get off life, and it's really hard to go against when you're playing a bunch of 4 and 5 costs, right? So Onami is just a staple in this deck, I think. Next in this deck, we do have another form of removal in 2 Rocket Luffys. I probably would bump this up if I could. But again, I think that this card at best just gets you a +1. It is also another trigger where you can KO a 4 or less from your opponent's board, which is great. If you play this on curve, essentially what you can do if you're at 2 life or less, you can trash it, KO a 4 or less, and then draw a card, which is really good. I'm not in love with this card in this deck, but again, it is just another form of removal. So think about it like your 5th and 6th copies of Onami, which again can be really useful in certain situations, right? What I have opted for instead of Luffy has been 2 Sabos. And the reason why I go for 2 Sabos is because Sabo sometimes is super important to get you down to 1 life. The best way to play against the Enel is to keep them at 2 or more life, right? Because Enel wants to get down to 1 life so he can start proccing trigger like leader effect for free, right? Sometimes your opponent will starve Enel, which is kind of ironic, and it's your responsibility to get yourself down to 1 life. So Sabo does that pretty well. So on play, you may trash one of your life, either top or bottom, and KO up to a 5 or less. Again, another form of removal, really nice. And on top of the fact that you can kind of dictate the game in that way if they try to starve you at 2 life or 3 life or whatever, right? So Sabo, I think, is super important in this deck, and needed, honestly. So that's what's there. Next, we are going to play 2 Charlotte Compound. This is a new vanilla monster from EBO1, and I think Compound is pretty good, but I also think that Peril Sparrow, the 6 cost 8k, is also really good. It just really is a preference on what vanilla you like. I think that Compound is pretty good because of the fact that it is a 9 cost body, or a 9,000 power body, which requires 2 Gordons for your Red Purple Wall players to bottom deck, and it's also really hard to go over a 9,000 power body with just regular characters, right? So at 7 Dawn turn, let's say for example you go Sabo turn 3 if you're going first, right? So on your 5 Dawn turn, and Compat on turn 4, saying you're going second, or you're going first still, right? Those are 2 big bodies that now your opponent all of a sudden has to deal with, and now you have mid-game pressure, which is something that seems to be Enel's weakness for a good majority of the meta. It doesn't really do anything until it gets to late game. So if you can establish like quicker bodies, I think that Enel stands a better chance at just winning overall, right? I have cut this down to 2. It used to be at 3, now it's at 2, okay? Next, we do play the top end, and this is the obligatory 4 Charlotte Katakuri. I do not think you could play this card at any less than 4, because if you play it at any less than 4, you are at a disadvantage. Charlotte Katakuri, again, is another removal card and can also put your life back on the top of your life just in case of anything, right? So on a 10 Dawn turn, what you can do is you can play Onami, right? And you can give anything banished. And then on top of that, you can go Katakuri, put Onami back in your life, and now you have removal for next turn in case they ever swing into you, or it's going to be there eventually, right? Katakuri is also really good against Eustace, Captain Kid in green, Gecko Morio in black, and any top end card that is 8 costs or less, Katakuri can essentially put it at the bottom of your opponent's life, and it is just a dead brick in hand until you decide to go for game and kill them, right? So Katakuri is so important in Enel. I think you have to play it at 4. If you play it at any less than 4, you're probably playing the deck wrong, right? Next in the top end, we are going into 4 Yamato. And again, Yamato is another top end card. If you don't know what Yamato does, is on play, you get to KO one character from your opponent's side of the board equal to both of your life, right? So like, let's say you're at 1 life and your opponent's at 3 life, you can KO up to a 4 cost. And typically this is really good because of the fact that it is another form of removal. And then if you are at 1 life or less after that, you get to add a life card from the top of your life, or from the top of your deck to your life, right? So you play Yamato for 9 and you're at 1 life, which Enel again loves to be at. You get to KO something for free, and then you get to add a life card back. So now you feel really healthy, because like I said before, Enel at 1 life is really another leader at 3 life, right? So when you go Yamato, what essentially ends up happening is Enel's now at 4 life, and you just establish a 9k 9 cost body, right? So that's really good. The way that people play around Yamato is by keeping you at 2 life, because then you can pop something, but then you can't get the extra life back, which is super valuable. And that's why I play Sabo. I might even bump Sabo up to 3 or 4, because Sabo is really good into getting you into Yamato range in order for it now to be effective, right? Next in this deck, and again, another reason why people leave you at 2 life or more, is because you play Porcus the Ace. This is the best card out of OP7 in my personal opinion that has come out. And it's really powerful for any yellow leader in general, but in Enel it just goes kind of crazy, right? So on play, you get to add a card from the top of your deck to the top of your life, and then if you have 2 or less life, you get to gain Rush on a 10 cost 10k body, right? And that's super insane because of the fact that before, Enel did not have Rush. Now you get to go 5, you get to swing with your leader in 5 and everything else you have on the board, and then set up into your Porcus Ace, Porcus the Ace, and then you're back at quote-unquote 4 life with Porcus the Ace. Again, people do tend to play around this by leaving you at 2 to 3 life, but there are ways around that by using Flampe, by using Sabo, and making sure that you get there, right? So that's super important. Next, we're gonna talk about the events in the deck, and we only play 8, but the reason why we play these is because, again, it is so important. We play Kingdom Come, which again is another form of removal, but one thing that Enel used to struggle with so heavy back in OP5 was any big body, because of the fact that Enel does not have great forms of removal against big bodies. So if you play a 5 cost or higher against Enel, it typically sticks there unless you kill it by battle. And it's really hard to kill 5 cost or higher by battle with Enel, because again, you have such a weak mid game that until you see your top end, you're kind of stuck, right? So I would play Kingdom Come in this slot, because again, if you are an Enel player, you like being at 1 life, and what Kingdom Come does, I used to call it Raigo because that's what they call it in Japan, and I think that's a better name. What it basically does is KOs any card and then brings you down to 1 life, right? So again, Enel is super important here, because if you're at 1 life, you're technically at 3, and then if they wanted to swing at you, you go into leader effect and you're at 3 life, right? So Kingdom Come, super important in this deck. And then lastly, the best card in this deck, outside of beige, in terms of triggers, is going to be You're the One That Should Disappear, which is our 0 cost event for yellow. And its trigger is if you have 0 life cards in your life, right? You may add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to your life, and then you can discard a card from hand, right? And what that basically means, right, is if you at 0 life, right? You're at 0 life. You can, if you're at 0 life with Enel, right? Let's say that your last life is You're the One Who Should Disappear, right? And you have, let's say, 1 card in hand, right? What essentially happens is, let's say your opponent swings into you for 5, right? You take it. It's You're the One Who Should Disappear. What ends up happening is this and Enel resolve at the same time. So essentially what you get is you can discard 2 cards from your hand and gain 2 life back, because that Enel effect triggers at the same time that You're the One Who Should Disappear triggers. And then at the same time, now you have 2 more, and I mean, this would be insane, right? This would be insane if you get another one off life, right? But you get 2 more life cards to work with that your opponent was not anticipating having to deal with that turn, right? So You're the One essentially is like another beige, where it just lets you win the games for free. And I think that's basically the essence of Enel, is like a cockroach. It just doesn't die. But I think it's really good. And I think that this deck is brutally unrepresented in the OP7 format right now. And I think it only gets better in OP8. A card that I probably would replace if I had to would probably be replacing Compound, and I would add 2 Enel Rush characters, because again, it just adds aggression. There is an aggro build, an aggro version of this deck where you play Ace, where you play Enel, and it's really good. I just like playing this deck more defensively because of the fact that I want to make sure that I can withstand hits and not die to, you know, 4 cost 7k rushes like Kid and Killer, right? So that's basically my Enel deck profile. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the comment section down below. And I'd love to give you guys gameplay. Like always, this is Coach Kobo, and it's been a pleasure doing this deck profile for you. And I'm signing out. Peace.